All
It's
right.
7 o'clock, folks, so I'm going to go on to mute.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Phil Wild, and I'm one of the producers of FLEFF. I'm part of the team that collaborates with Patty Zimmerman and Tom Chevery, the co-directors of the Finger Lakes Environmental Film Festival. At exactly this time last year, we shuttered the Embodied Festival and ran 3 online exhibitions. Welcome now to the 24th edition of the Finger Lakes Environmental Film Festival. This was an historic year. COVID, protests on racial injustices, Black Lives Matter, masks, vaccines, remote learning, opera houses and theaters were shuttered. The insurrection at the US Capitol, this new Zoomiverse, and our yearning for connections around ideas and community. This year, for the first time in 24 years, we are 100% virtual. We have 2 FLEFF mottos. For this year, FLEFF, a different environment, and the other, we are the screen. We're delighted and honored that all of you from everywhere can join us today for this roundtable on theater in the time of COVID, with speakers from across the country. During this event, please look at the chat for the extended bios, links, and references. At the end of the talkback, we ask all participants to unmute and put their cameras on and give a round of applause to our panelists. There'll be an after party in the Zoom lobby immediately following this roundtable. Our moderator tonight, joining us from Chicago, is J.R. Pierce. JR is associate editor of the American Theater magazine, and he writes for the Chicago Tribune. Take it away, JR. The stage is yours.
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, I'm J.R. Pierce. You'll find my byline under Gerald Raymond Pierce, my full name, because I like to make people work a little bit when they're trying to find my work. I am really excited to be here. I remember a little over a year ago at American Theater when theaters were shutting down across the country. We literally sat in an editorial meeting saying, well, what are we going to write about? If everybody's closing down, what are we going to write about? Are we going to have anything to write about? Little did we know that we would have no shortage of things to write about. And thankfully, to people like our panelists today, these things that we've been able to write about are new, are innovative, are fun, are interesting, and are theater. And so I'm really excited to have this conversation today. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce our panelists one by one. They'll give a little background on their organization and some of the shows they've been working on over the last year. And so to start in alphabetical order by last name, I'm going to go to Sam Begelm.
Hello. Thanks, JR. And thanks everyone for joining, and thanks Patty and the whole FLEFF crew for thinking to make this panel. It was very exciting to think of the ways that theater is somehow overlapping now with film by virtue of being forced on screen. And I think it's had a lot of, at least for me and for our company, had a lot of productive effects as well as frustrating ones, that were the obvious ones. So as many folks here know, I'm the artistic director of the Cherry Arts here in Ithaca, on the unceded lands of the Cayuga Nation, I think we should say. The Cherry has been quite active. It was just about a year ago now that we canceled our May production, just like everybody did. Actually, it was a March production. I forget. And we rolled straight to, we went like hyperactively to commission new works from international playwrights, because we thought this is, we work with these international playwrights, and we thought how interesting everybody is going through a version of the same lockdown now. And so we commissioned 6 short plays, we streamed them, sort of interwoven in a live stream using this technology called OBS that we'll probably talk about later in the day, the session. And then we've gone on to do, sort of to improve and do this season, we did 2 streamed shows. Both plays that we had programmed to produce live and that offered themselves quite interestingly to different forms of a streaming production. And we've done 1 outdoor show, and we have another one that's coming up in about a month. And the outdoor show used a sort of soundtrack. Everyone was masked. Rather than mic folks under masks, they lip synced without lips to a soundtrack of all the dialogue. So that was a fascinating experiment. It was a big sort of outdoor farce for the family audiences. And then our upcoming outdoor show is a headphone show, which is our 3rd in that genre. And so again, a form that offers itself really well to this time. So we've thrown a lot of things at the wall, and excited to talk about some of it.
And did you have any images you wanted to share, Sam?
Oh, sure. If this is the image moment, I will do that.
Yeah, go for it.
I'll do it quickly. So the first one, I'll do some quick. So these are stills from Felt Sad, Posted a Frog. 6 plays. 2 of them were actually written as Zoom calls, and so they looked like Zoom calls, but we didn't use Zoom. This is like custom created to look like a Zoom call, because other plays looked more like this. This was a play from Serbia, and then this was a play from El Salvador. And so this is our outdoor play, everyone masked. You can see the effect that sort of trying to use masks expressively, and that's what the audience looked like. That was back in September. So tough for comedy. Well, I'll be honest, like, you know, there's not that density. Our most recent play, not most recent, our second most recent was called A Day. This was the setup in a big theater, a big, beautiful theater in Ithaca called The State. And this was like elaborately mixed through OBS. So the show itself looked like this, like constantly changing rectangles and backdrops, and occasionally cutting out to a master camera that showed, this is the very end of the show. There's sort of text rolling over. So we were constantly being brought back to sort of how it was being made.
Yeah, Sam, it looks like we're stuck on the Natasha and Jeff photo.
Oh.
I'm not sure. We're stuck on that first pane, actually.
Oh, sharing is paused. Hang on, let me, I'm sorry, let me try that again. Thank you. Is that better? Great.
That's
so
great.
So this is the end of the, right. So here are some of the other sort of looks. And then here is the, oh, wait. Oh, you were stuck on back here? Oh, this
Yeah,
is
but
really,
this is great. We
yeah,
we
right.
got a lot of those in
All
there,
right, you got a
and
lot.
we'll touch on a lot of those as we keep talking as well.
All right.
Thanks, Sam. I'm going to throw it to Andrew Hungerford, who I know has some great visuals for us as well.
Oh, well. Oh, no. Now the
No
bar
pressure,
of
no pressure.
expectations have been raised. Hi, everyone. I'm Andrew Hungerford. I'm the producing artistic director at No Theater of Cincinnati, which in Cincinnati, being in the middle of the Midwest, is the crossroads of many lands. And so, among others, we sit on the ancestral lands of the Miami, the Hopewell, and the Adena. Uh, so when we were in the middle of the run of a show when the pandemic hit, a national new play network rolling world premiere of the play Alabaster by Audrey Cephaly, and we got shut down halfway through our performances, and we rapidly pivoted to do a 3-camera recording of that we were able to stream online digitally. And we actually met our box office goal for the show, which was very exciting for us because we thought we were going to lose a lot of money. And then we also produced the Cincinnati Fringe Festival, which is a 2-week celebration of experimental live performance, and that was about to happen a month into the pandemic. It opens every year at the end of May, so we rapidly pivoted that to be an online festival and showcased 25 works as video on demand. We reached out to artists to see if the work that they had planned to present could be adapted to digital distribution. If there was another work they had that they could do that could be adapted for digital distribution, or if they wanted to defer their acceptance to a future live festival. So that ended up being very successful and exciting. And then as part of our pivot, we wanted to find ways to immediately generate revenue for local artists. So we started doing an audio play production program called Radio No, where we've produced essentially 1 new radio play a month for the duration of the pandemic. Some of those have been scripts that we've previously developed for second stage shows, and some that we've reached out to specifically for this project. Then coming into our season, we thought, okay, what do we do? And so we called our season 23, We Can Rebuild It, thinking the implied bigger, faster, stronger. But thinking about, okay, how do we take this pause in theater to rebuild what theater can be, both in terms of what stories are presented, equity of inclusion, and also equity in pay? How do we build theater back in a new way? So that was exciting, but then what does that mean in terms of plays? Well, so we selected a series of plays that we could present digitally. First was this play Feast by Megan Gogarty, which was originally written to be performed with the entire audience at a banquet with the lead performer. And we were going to do it at a local ale house and have it be a giant party. It's a riff on the story of Beowulf. It's about Grendel's mother. So we talked to the playwright, and she rewrote it for us to be streamed, to be a streaming performance. So we did it in a way that appeared as though it was live. The performer, fortunately, had just moved into an old disused church, which made for a great performance space. And we did a fully designed show with lighting and everything recorded from her home and then broadcast at specific times as though it were live. And as, oh, that's the next show. And then as sort of to engage further in liveness, if people ordered tickets at least a week in advance, we mailed them a treat that they would be instructed to open at one point in the show. It was cookies. But then there was also another treat that was hidden in a false bottom. So there was a magic trick that happened essentially through the course of the show when they were instructed to dig deeper. And it was really exciting. Oh, I should mention one of the other complications is that while I run a theater in Cincinnati through the duration of the pandemic, I've been living in Los Angeles. So I'm also a resident scenic and lighting designer. So I've been designing the scenery and lighting from 1,800 miles away. And some of that's been done using sort of pre-visualization software that like you might use for visual effects in a lot of films. And then some of it is the genius of our technical director figured out a way for me to connect to our computerized lighting console in Cincinnati so that I can program the lights on my iPad from 1,800 miles away. And the first time I got to do that was, like I just started giggling. It was so amazing. We also did an outdoor show called Fannie Lou Hamer Speak on It, which was a truck show that we two-person truck show, literally performed on the back of a pickup truck that we drove to 14 different neighborhoods in Cincinnati and did that in conjunction with a Get Out the Vote rally. So that was a really exciting thing to do live and for the neighborhood and actually in person. And we did actually do a true live stream of one of those, a true multicam live stream from a parking lot with questionable Wi-Fi, and somehow it worked and it was amazing. The second show of our main stage season was play Zach by Christian St. Croix, which was a riff on teen sitcoms of the 90s. Our slogan was, "Whom does the bell save?" And so that was performed in our space with two actors who were masked except when performing. We put in strict COVID protocols so that we had a lot of testing as they would on film sets. We were basically adhering to the SAG guidelines. And our tech team was actually on a different floor of our building through the whole process so that the actors and technicians were in isolated spaces. After that, because we were interrogating different kinds of liveness, we decided to do a devised show called The Light at the End of a World, which we developed together, which was actually a choose your own adventure show, where we had three different storylines that audiences could select between. So there it is. So there's our essentially a DVD selection screen. So it started with a true live stream that was 15 minutes of me live streaming about lighthouses from my attic. And then every 15 minutes, the audience would get to choose which path they wanted to follow next. And then it all tied together with one more bit about lighthouses. And then we all sort of celebrated together in a post-show Zoom. And then our most recent show, which sort of took everything we've learned over the course of this digital season, was a new premiere play called Theater, a Love Story by Cara Dodds Fitch, which is a play that interrogates theater and capitalism and the economics of how this all works. And what do we even mean when we get together to tell stories? And so that had a combo of, oh no, I've done it wrong. I'm so sorry. I think I selected, there we go. So we had several elements of this that were performed live, but all of the sections that were filmed, we also filmed in multiple different locations so that we could layer the footage on top of each other to, again, explore different varieties of liveness, so that we could essentially do things that we called virtual projections. So we took a performance from one location and projected it on the back wall while we were watching the performance in a different location. And this allowed us, in some ways, we were also able to do a bunch of fun visual effects. We had some great local choreographers work with us. And this allowed us to take what would be the variations on performance that happen over the course of an entire run and collapse those onto themselves so that it could be experienced in one performance. And then we've got more stuff we're playing with next. But that is, sorry, I talk fast and there's a lot. So that's a quick overview of all the things we've done so far this season. Thanks.
That's awesome, Andrew. And I will come back to some of those points you talked about in a minute. But first, I want to give Ralph a chance. Ralph Lewis, please, let's meet you and your company.
Hey, great. Well, thank you very much for having me for this. My name is Ralph Lewis. I am one of the three performance producers of Peculiar Works Project. We are a site-specific performance company, which means we just do theater, but not in theaters. I am coming to you from the Bowery in Manhattan, which was America's first highway. Literally, the original name of the Bowery was the highway because it went around the swamps. And it was the trail built by the Lenni-Lenape indigenous tribe. So we are grateful to them for the Bowery. Before I get into this, I just want to say this really seems like a very interesting time to do this because it seems like a lot of theater is sort of starting back. but yet some people are moving forward with virtual, and we're almost, it's sort of dual paths that we're on. And for me, it's a very non-binary thing. I mean, I plan on doing live performance. I plan on doing more of this, and I plan on doing things that were somewhere in between. I did want to say that it's been a bumpy ride for all of us, because the technology, for the most part, that we've been working with was either built for teaching or for conference meetings for white collar business people. And we have been gradually sort of adapting these technologies and writing new code to sort of make them fit for our performance needs. But it doesn't always work so well. But I do think it is a sign that even when we are going back to live theater, this is still going to go on. I mean, this could be the first new discipline since photography, depending on whether you count cuisine or not as an artistic discipline. But I do think that a lot of this is going to keep going. And there is code being written now that hasn't even come out yet by projection designers and others. So there's going to be a lot to look forward to. But I'm sure we all want to get back to the live theater as well. So let's do it all. I'm going to do the awkward share screen now with you guys and try to show you a little bit of what we did. So let's start at the beginning. I did want to say, when this pandemic hit, we didn't really know what to do to begin. And we kind of stopped for a second and, just kind of like froze there. And then we started saying, well, how long can we be like this? We've got to do something. I started with a solo piece so that not to involve a lot of other participants. It was called Behind the Curtain. And these are my curtains behind me. That was about the very first theaters in New York City, basically the first theaters in America, as sort of a virtual tour with like 100 images in under 60 minutes to try to keep it very visual and so that people didn't have to look at me very often. After that, we did some informal in-house Zoom readings, which I think Zoom can work very well for development in the future. And then we did some sort of Zoom staged readings. And, we didn't really like stage readings before the pandemic. So it's probably not something we're going to do a lot of. And we've not been real fans of the sort of headshot theater. We think there's a lot more possibilities with Zoom than just seeing the heads and shoulders of actors. So after that, we actually started spreading out. We've always been a multidisciplinary company. So the idea of making a film seemed like a very good thing for us. And so we had the short piece that had been accepted into a theater festival that moved online. And we thought, rather than just doing a Zoom reading of the play, let's make a film of it. We negotiated with Actors Equity, and we found this building down the block from me. Bowery Union Gallery let us use their roof to shoot our film. We went out and bought $600 worth of PPE, and there it is, a bunch of stuff. And we negotiated with Screen Actors Guild to work a contract. We developed a whole health safety plan. We hired a health safety specialist, and we loaded all of our stuff onto the roof of this building. We chose a roof. We had looked at some parts. We thought the roof would be airy enough that it would be safer than any sort of indoor environment. And it was also sort of a nod to a Dada film called Entr'acte that we've always been big fans of. The piece involved actors around a table playing a game of Mahjong. And so we were constantly having to wipe down and clean up the Mahjong tiles as the actors used them. We did most 75 to 80% of all of the shots were just one actor at a time. And we did a couple of shots where we had all the actors together, but for the most part, for safety reasons, we tried to give the appearance that they were all sitting around the table without having them all sit around the table. We had cue cards for them. We did do a couple of two shots. But we were all masked and goggled except for the actors. One of the hard issues for us was getting everybody tested, but not tested too far ahead of time. It had to be within like 48 hours. And then results took 3 days, which you can't do in 2 days. But we did finally get everybody tested. We got them all on the set. and we shot this film on the roof. And Language Games is a 17-minute film that, you know, we later edited. This is one of the shots where we did an audio track so that we had the audio to tag all of the video onto as we created the piece in editing. And, you know, the actors seemed to have a fun time doing it. And you know, this you can see, it wasn't just me and my two partners. We, you know, by the time we got it all done, there was quite sort of a big team to create the piece. And let's see, can I close this and sharing screen? Let's see. If I could, I'd love to show you another piece that we did just shortly after it. We did a live piece. Now, this was in October as the second wave of the pandemic was starting to come down, and just before the holiday rush began, but we did a benefit for a local performance club called Dixon Place, and we did it promenade style. If you don't know what that is, we had different performances along a route that the audience walked. We did them in very small groups. Everybody was masked. All the performers were tested. Again, we got to use our PPE. We had the artists, it was very multidisciplinary. We had artists creating paintings that the audience could watch, action paintings. Stage managers, of course, were timing everything. They had their masks. They would escort the audiences in small little pods from one piece to another. And out in front of a mural, they performed. They performed in an alley. We had tour guides also that would direct the audience to different pieces. We found murals. Most of these pieces took place at the locations where Dixon Place had previously been located over the years in the area of the Lower East Side. We had singers and a drummer hidden in a doorway, and we had puppets that were masked. So yeah, like ventriloquism, I guess. Another sort of puppet piece, different kinds of PPE you could use for face, you know, so that you could still see their mouths move. We even spaced an actor up outside the window of where I live, creating social distance wherever we could. But it was possible, and it is going to be possible to do more live outdoor performances as the weather does warm up. So those are just two things that we did at the time. And now I'll do, let's see, the awkward stop sharing, and I'm back now. So those are just two of the projects we did. Of course, the staged Zoom readings don't take pretty pictures, as we had, you know, as we can all tell about that. But I think that does my time. Can I do one little quick poem? Okay, bear with me, JR.
Yeah, plug it.
Yeah, okay,
Plug
here
it.
it
Let's
is.
hear it.
Here it is, very avant-garde. Zoom webinar, Facebook Live, YouTube Live, Instagram Live, Vimeo live stream, Live Storm, StreamYard, Twitch, Shindig, AirMeet, OBS, Streamlab OBS, Restream, Ecamm Live, Live Lab, QLab, Mad Mapper, Lightform, Siphon, Black Hole, multiple cameras, mics and monitors, editing software, PowerPoint, After Effects, video switchers, light rings, teleprompters, and Eventbrite. Just to point out, we're all dealing with a whole lot of new tools that we have never used before. And it's a lot to learn, and everybody's learning just so much of this. I'm so proud of all of my colleagues who have been doing this work. So thank you guys very much.
Yeah, and I'm glad you pointed that out, because one of the biggest things that I've been covering, at least in my work, is kind of this gray area that we've been operating in that's between what live theater has traditionally been considered and film. And, you know, we're here for a film festival. So I would love to ask you all, how are you operating in that space? Especially for those who don't know, there was a controversy over the last year between Actors Equity Association and SAG-AFTRA, which represents movie actors and television actors, and whose jurisdiction is theater that is made for the internet and for like film, essentially. So who has the right to represent those actors? And of course, the additional aspect that SAG-AFTRA doesn't cover stage managers, and Actors Equity does cover stage managers. So it's a very complicated mess. So I'd love to just ask you, and I'll start with Andrew, because I know we're in the conversation of liveness, and when you remove the audience and you bring in cameras, the question of liveness comes in as well. But how have you been navigating that kind of gray area between those two very distinct art forms?
Yeah, it is a great and complicated, very complicated question. And one of the things that was one of the reasons for embracing so many different kinds of work in our season, honestly, to be able to explore different kinds of audience and screen relationship. Because yeah, what is it that distinguishes theater when it's being experienced through a screen like film? And early on in the pandemic, I caught the monologue Seawall that Andrew Scott performed. It's a Simon Stevens play, and it was recorded long before the pandemic, years before, but it was performed to a single camera that was in a room where the camera took the place of the audience observer. And I saw that and I thought, this is the first thing on a screen that has felt like theater that I've seen, and not like a filmed play, because film plays are also great. But I think that's a distinctly different thing. And this felt tailored to the form, but it wasn't a film. It felt like theater. So that's what we tried to do in a lot of our work, is think of the camera as the stand-in for the audience, and so and to really represent the audience perspective. So for a lot of our work, Feast was very specifically performed to the camera, where the character in the play had set up the camera to deliver this message. So it's speaking directly to the audience through this lens. And then when we got to Theater Love Story, while we did some things with, as you saw in some of the images, with close-ups and sort of juxtaposing shots, everything was still from a single camera perspective, even if it were single cameras that were layered on top of each other and combined, because there was something that felt very true to theater about that. And Theater A Love Story is particularly a transmedia production that does intentionally live in the area between film and theater. But for a lot of it, it was that single camera thing. And then, of course, we broke our own rule on Zach, because it was a parody of multicam comedies. So we did have a couple of sections that were very specifically the sitcom that you're watching, where we did have multiple cameras set up to simulate a multicam sitcom shoot. But that was, again, in opposition to the liveness of the single camera through the rest of the show.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you that because of Theater A Love Story. I know if anyone follows Kari.Switch on Twitter, she's been one of the most vocal supporters of theater has not gone anywhere. This is still theater. All of this is still theater. And I know, Sam, you also talked about when we chatted for Offscript, American Theater's little podcast on Facebook, little plug, you talked about how a moving camera kind of had that same stand-in effect. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I think I have figured out the problem with the images that I had with the images. If you folks would not mind if I just share the screen one more time, because we did, I want to pick up what Andrew said. We did two different, so this is one setup that we used in a very big theater, the State Theater, that had, as you can see, 4 green screen booths and 4 actors and 9 cameras. And so what the show usually looked like was this, like highly mixed, backgrounded, and then this is what the end of the show looked like. We cut between this sort of look for scenes to this sort of look in between the scenes. We were always called back. But then the next show, we did in the same theater, and this was the setup, so very different aesthetic. But that one, I really wanted to feel less mediated. It was effectively a solo show for an actor and a musician who has some lines. And so these are sort of, this is what it looked. So we had one camera person operating a Steadicam who just followed this actor around the whole time. Occasionally we would cheat. You can see, to bring the 2 actors closer together for a conversation, we didn't get the color balance exactly right. But, you know, and occasionally we would put a background on him. But for the most part, this show, which was called Hotel Good Luck, a Mexican play, oh yeah, like occasionally a little, for the most part, we really wanted it to feel like you can see it's in a big old theater, like the Fly Gallery, everything is a part of it. And then for the earlier show, A Day, it was like hyper mediated, and the movement that you would normally get from being able to move a cast around in 3 dimensions came from constant camera switching, constant changing of the the rectangle setup. And honestly, like this thing of like wanting to flip rectangles came directly out of a frustration with the Zoom theater that I'd been seeing. I was just like, people, like this rectangle, like it or lump it, this is our new stage. Like you have to compose it, you know, you have to you cannot be satisfied. Well, as I forget who said, like this little, like, I mean, it's, you just can't do too many shots like that in a movie. And that's in fact our very first show, that, you know, that's like super rapid response, sort of 6 commission plays. One of the things that I was least happy about it was the fact that we didn't vary the composition very much. Like it really was this shot for, it was a long play too, for like 2 hours. It was like a lot of chest up. Even though we, you know, we could put effects on it and we could switch it up to some extent. But that was a very, you know, in the moment when so many of my peers were so bummed out at not making work, I was having these like brain explosions of like, okay, I'm used to moving people around in 3 dimensions while a bunch of other people in 3 dimensions are sitting still and looking at that shifting picture. And now I'm moving cameras, or 1 or more cameras around and cutting between them. And it was a really like explosive reimagining of how to tell a story visually, you know, for after the number of years I've been doing it the one way, to have to kind of become a half-assed film director was like kind of very exciting and also quite intimidating.
I'm gonna pivot the question real quick because I have a very, oh, Ralph, you had something to say.
Yeah, I would like to. I
it.
just think it was great that Andrew mentioned Seawall, because I'm experiencing this strange emotion these past few days of this sort of nostalgia guilt, that I'm going back and replaying these pieces from March and April, the Apple Family trilogy, the Public Theater's documentary piece, and just, you know, it's like, I just remembering how there was maybe 1 or 2 things a week you could probably watch online, and now you could watch a half a dozen things every night online. And I'm feeling bad for kind of, oh, the old days when the pandemic just hit, you know, that's just awful. But I did want to say, you know, I'm a member of both SAG and Actors Equity, and it was a difficult thing for us, you know, whose allegiance do we have? And for me, I sort of feel like Actors Equity has to take the audience into account and SAG does not. And so Actors Equity has to have a lot more hurdles than SAG does. Not that SAG doesn't have a lot of hurdles, but that's why we chose to make a film through SAG rather than dealing with Actors Equity. And we can show our film for the rest of our lives instead of, you know, the rest of the week, which I think is what Equity does. And I sort of think about this, people talking about, is it film or is it theater? You know, I think a lot of that has to do with what tools you're using. Is it live or are you replaying something? And whether it's theater or performance, you know, that's up to the content. You know, to me, theater's telling a story, performance is everything else. So, you know, maybe you have to decide if it's theater or performance first, and then you can decide whether it's film or whether it's theater. But I think they're all good things. We don't necessarily have to come down on one side or the other.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned those early days, because I know a lot of the conversations I was having with artistic leaders those first few months, there was this feeling of, if we don't put something out there, we're going to lose touch with our audience. Like the whole idea of out of sight, out of mind. So I would love, can anyone speak to like how that has affected how you've approached programming over the last year?
Well, for us, you know, we're a small organization that has basically nothing in the way of cash reserves. So we are the thing that I kept telling people at the beginning is, you know, we recognize that we are like a shark. If we stop swimming, we die. And not only did we owe it to, one, we didn't lay anyone off during the pandemic, and we had decided we weren't going to do that. So how do we make that work? And Two, Cincinnati has a very large community of local artists, equity and non-equity alike, and particularly a large collection of non-equity performers. And so the question is how all of their work has disappeared. How do we find ways to meaningfully allow work that can compensate them? And so we're serving multiple constituencies: our staff, our artists, and our audience. And so it was really about finding what are the best ways to serve all of them simultaneously. And so we just started running. The other thing we said is we were building our wings on the way down. So
driving the train as you lay the track is the other.
yeah, that too.
I found that similarly, Andrew, to what you said, since in our very small community, weirdly, we have 3 theater companies, 3 is, sort of established professional theater companies. And the Cherry is the smallest of them and the most experimental. And it has the least cast reserves, but also the audience that was the most used to flexibility, the audience that was the most, ready to see weird shit. So, so we felt quite like a responsibility and also a freedom to try stuff that we didn't know. We've said for a long time, if we know exactly how to make this play, we're not interested in it. That's always been a kind of in our background. And so this was a great moment for that, because suddenly nobody knew how to do anything. And we were used to that feeling. And so that was a kind of I felt like, I remember being on one of the TCG calls with all the regional, arts leaders from our region and just saying like, well, we just dialed up 6 international playwrights. They're all writing stuff. We're exploring this new thing, OBS. We feel like if everyone Skypes in, we can live mix it. And they were all just like, I could no sooner do that at my huge Lort Theater. I could no sooner be entertaining that right now than, And so I felt like, yeah, with that sort of set of possibilities came the responsibility to really push it as far as we could and to, serve the audiences as best we could. Did we lose JR?
I don't know.
Carry
I
on,
do
gentlemen.
think,
We may have lost him.
Okay.
I do think to your point, Sam, about having the audiences that are used to the weird shit. We too, benefit from that, and that our audiences expect us to experiment. And every time we do a play, we think about, okay, what is at least one thing on this play that we can do that we've never done before, to push ourselves in certain ways. Now there were this time around a lot more things that we hadn't done before that we were trying to do. So it was complicated. And Ralph, I'm so sorry, but real quick, I was thinking about your question about SAG versus what defines film, and one of the interesting things in the equity agreements now that have rolled out is you're not allowed to do visual effects essentially, or anything that couldn't be done live in theater. Otherwise, it's considered a film, which I think complicates things in lots of exciting and different ways.
Or shoot out of order. I'd love to throw that one in. You can't shoot out of order. That was another one. Yeah.
Wow. To me, that's all falls in SAG's favor. I feel like I wasn't privy to those high level SAG versus equity arrangements, but as soon as you're like, oh, we can shoot out of order, then why wouldn't you? All of a sudden there, these things that we've had to work around for millennia, you could actually have an excuse to do the film way.
From the equity meetings I've attended, and I know this is, even before the pandemic, equity is very concerned about images of actors being captured in an unflattering light. And, their rules about videotaping shows have always been very, very strict, because they don't want any actors, a member coming to them and saying, how did you let this shot of me, get out there? And, of course, that's what SAG does. But, I've never really agreed with Equity's position on some of this, but I do understand why they have that position. And it may have even gotten tighter once we moved to Zoom.
Mhm.
Yeah. Sorry, everybody. My computer crashed and I've switched to a different computer. So bear with me for a second.
Batman.
But I'm back. We're here. We're here. It's live theater, right? So I'd love to ask, as artistic leaders, sorry, I've lost my train of thought now. It's thrown me off. Oh, I'd love to ask, because a lot of the work we've seen, both in terms of like having promenade performances or the Fannie Lou Hamer, you've brought the work to audiences. So can we talk a little bit about the potential that has in theater, especially as we enter into this hybrid stage of doing theater where some people are vaccinated, some people aren't, and not everybody may be comfortable coming back into a space?
Well, if I can jump in, JR, we've thought of it in both ways. Not only that, we're going to want to be bringing some people back into the space at a time that other people are not, you don't feel comfortable with that, but also, like Andrew at No, we had the extraordinary experience of actually meeting our box office budget numbers that we had budgeted for the normal season on a live stream thing, because what we lost when we lost, the chunk you would expect of local folks who would normally have come to the live shows but weren't interested in seeing it on screen. Absolutely understand it, no harm, no foul. But we then gained a fair amount of international and national viewers, and that was like, so now it's like, and because we do international plays, we do shows. I mean, as I think all three of our companies do, that you can't really see necessarily. It's not like the latest off-Broadway thing that whatever town you go to, your Big Lord Theater is going to be doing their production of that. That there might be it, like, basically, who knows? I think is the big. It would be amazing if we could retain, if it would be worth it to like build in a live stream component to our live shows, so that we could still sell those tickets to, build a sort of national audience. And I think the jury's out whether that will pay for itself, because it's a lot of extra work. But we're definitely going to try. I'm curious about, Ralph, Andrew, if you folks are thinking about that stuff.
Can I tag on to that? I mean, our company has a long history of doing promenade performances. So we're very accustomed of moving small pods of audiences around in small groups where they have a journey through the piece and through the site. So our work might be uniquely situated for the coming back, at least in the beginning stages of it. But I do think that one of the things about virtual performance is that now you're having people see your work from LA to Texas to Minnesota to other countries. I mean, I think that's probably the biggest reason why this work is not going to go away, because people can access your work in a way that, if you live within a few blocks of the show, you can go see it. And other than that, you miss out. So I think there is going to be a lot more of that. To me, a lot of correlations between early live television. I think, but what you're saying about, I think we're due for sort of this hybrid kind of live virtual thing. I think Broadway just did it last weekend, but it reminds me of Richard Burton. Maybe one of the associates can find this because I don't know the name, but Richard Burton did a production of Hamlet that he shot with like 16 cameras from different angles. And they gave a name for this type of film technique, electro something another. It's on Wikipedia somewhere. But I do think that we're going to have audiences and cameras seeing shows at the same time, at least at the beginning, or at least I hope so.
My God, Ralph, if they have, So if they
Go ahead,
have
Sam.
all 16 of those full recordings, you could like make a walkthrough of, you know, you could
Yeah.
like actually 3D Richard Burton nowadays. Anyway,
I
sorry.
remember on the this is weirdly tangential, but just for a moment. On the old DVD, the original DVD of Moulin Rouge, there was the Tango de Roxanne moment, and one of the DVD special features was you could switch between camera shots because they filmed it continuously. So you could go and like that feels like theater, you know.
Hmm.
Um, but building on what both of you were saying, I'm excited for this hybrid world where we can offer things because it's not just about the pandemic, it's an accessibility issue. You know, for it allows us to caption performances in a way that's very difficult for us to do live. For people who are immunocompromised, even not during times of pandemic, who it might not be a great idea to be in small confined spaces next to so many people. Suddenly, it's accessible to them. And I have a dream that someday small theaters like ours will be able to get together and have a platform where we can feature all of our work so that people from around the country can see it. Maybe it's the Indie Theater Network or whatever, that can be an app and you can subscribe and you can get all of these shows from around the country. I've been dreaming of this for years, and maybe the pandemic's going to instigate it. But there is the challenge, as you were saying, Ralph, of like how do we compensate actors fairly when equity requires, like, you have to pay for 2 full weeks of work to air it online. And so, we have a number of shows that we have great recordings of that I would love to make available, shows that feel important right now, and it would just be financially disastrous to put it online. And that's it makes me sad. And it's also the prohibitions against that equity has had again because rightly wanting to protect the images of the actors, but it basically means that I, as a designer, don't have video records of most of my work. I can have still photos, but I can't showcase like what a light cue actually looked like because I'm not allowed to because of the actors union. And I like my union, I don't know. Our union should really get together and figure this out.
This
Totally.
is one of my favorite topics to talk about, as my editor in chief will attest to, as I take over multiple meetings talking about this. But I do want to say, if anyone has questions in the audience, please feel free. If you're comfortable coming on camera and asking them, feel free to raise your hand. If you're not, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll read them, and our panelists will answer them. So as people do that, I'd love to, as we're talking about design, Andrew, how have you all been working to keep designers in your work? Because a lot of these designers, their work is so based in the physical space and in the physical, like building a set or having a lighting design or having a sound design in the space. Can you talk about how you've incorporated their work into your digital work?
It's interesting on our, I mean, I can say for us, like we've had, suddenly you just need different sorts of designers, like we had a conventional theater lighting designer for the most recent show for Hotel Good Luck, but then we had to find someone who knew how to operate a Steadicam, and someone who, which is, and that suddenly, but we have this amazing guy, I'll call him up by name, Noah Ellman, who like was our OBS guru, who basically was right out of undergrad, like super got hustling from day one and figured out, I think OBS is the wave of the future. And so, I mean, the middle show, A Day, the one with all the colored rectangles, had something like 700 OBS cues. Like it was a massively complicated thing. And that's a designer that lets a job description that didn't exist 6 months ago, and so, and then at the same time, we didn't have a lighting designer for that show. It was just like, we just lit the actors and then we put filters on them when we wanted them to be darker or lighter or a different color. So it's been really a moving target.
It's been really interesting, particularly since I'm the resident scenic and lighting designer for our company. So I do those things as part of my job. And so every show that we've done in the pandemic, except our device show, has actually been very traditionally lit. In that, as I said, I've been programming it from here, and it's been very cool. But also, there was an interesting thing on Theater: A Love Story because the set was mostly empty theaters and empty spaces. And so it was the selection of spaces, and then a lot of it was in post-production because our resident sound and video designer, Doug Borntrager, and I shared editing duties. We were doing it in Premiere Pro with a shared project, so we could both be editing from our own computers, and the file would just magically do its thing, as long as we kept our videos in the same place locally. And so much of the I think about that show in terms of digital scenography more than traditional scenic design. We had 3 different directors on the show, and each taking one section of it. And so then once we got all the footage, it was sort of like it was up to me to combine it in a scenographically meaningful way, and then do the visual effects that took the place of traditional scenic painting and things like that. And we still, of course, had our props designer on it who did the handful of props that were used in person and did whatever painting we needed. So it was an interesting collaborative thing. And we added an additional collaborator, a cinematographer on Theater A Love Story, who was great to work with in terms of knowing that this is the theatrical look that I want. What else do we need to make it work for camera? Because sometimes I got to watch it on a 4K camera with very similar color reproduction. Some locations I was watching on an iPad camera, and the colors I was seeing on that camera bore no relation to what was actually being captured. But I have had a running joke throughout my career for years that's like, oh, I'll fix that like you in post. And this I actually did. We did a couple essentially day for night shots where I just color corrected in post. It was amazing.
I'm gonna jump in here because we're getting a bit of a line. Sorry, Ralph, but
Okay.
we'll give you first dibs on this next question. I believe Jane McAllister was our first in line. Jane, go ahead.
Hi. Thank you. You can hear me, I guess. Hi.
Yes, we do.
I was just going to say, you guys are so encouraging and the antithesis of the hype of the Hamilton theater. You know, I loved Hamilton, but what you're saying, this is not really what I expected tonight. I expected to hear more about the problems, not about everything that's going on. And I'm just a theater goer. I'm not related to theater in any way, but just as a participant, as a theater goer. But I wanted to say, you're probably familiar with some of the London theaters that have been filmed, like Derek Jacobi and King Lear, that I saw at the Shakespeare Company. And it was really amazing. And also the Metropolitan Opera, has been doing that live. And then they also do a recording, and I've seen both of those, but I'm sure you're aware. But I just wanted to say thank you. It's been really inspiring to hear about you all, what you're doing. Thank you.
Thanks,
James Corden in the National Theater Live with the Servant of Two Masters adaptation. Oh, I'm nostalgic for seeing that. It was one of the first things in COVID that I saw. I also want to throw some props at Hotel Good Luck because, I saw that through the New Ohio Theater here in New York before I ever met Sam. And the work that they do with the cameras and then the site reveal at the end, I mean, it really does sort of show you the potential of this sort of work. I don't know if you guys know the USITT, the Technical Theater Guild. They're doing a lot of work in this area that is really terrific. There's also a resident group at La Mama called Culture Hub. They are developing this software called Live Lab, which is finally going to give musicians something where buffering and latency is less of an issue for them. They're doing some good stuff. There's also a video on YouTube of an organization called Piehole, the show. They talk about the show that they did for Under the Radar, and there is a schematic of all the different technology things they use, but a lot of stuff was borrowed or they had it at home. There's a lot of ways you can do these things on a very low level. You can also do them on a very high level. You don't have to have a grand amount of knowledge. My next show is going to be on 6 iPhones, so it doesn't all have to be big stuff. But the Piehole schematic, I really think, we have casting director, dramaturg, now we have intimacy director. The next new role in the theater, I think, is the technology designer, that you cannot do a show without hiring somebody to specifically design your technology. And I think that person, is going to do great things in the theater.
Yeah, I covered a theater that brought in a web designer. They had to bring in a web designer to design a full website for their show. I'm going to pivot to Phil Wild to ask a question next. Phil, go ahead.
Thank you, JR. I started as a video artist many years ago, but before that, I worked 3 summers in summer theater and professional summer theater and became completely addicted to theater. And in the back of my mind as a filmmaker for all these years has been this idea of getting outside the proscenium. You guys finally have done this thing of leaving that square theater where we all go and become viewers of the performance. I wanted to ask how this has either liberated you or scared you, or how do we deal with the idea of finally leaving the proscenium so well as some.
I mean, I was going to say something about Ralph's work, that I think it was so wonderful to see the promenade stuff. That was, I feel like, ultra high tech is one way to go, and to have a a technology designer, but ultra low tech actually winds up super duper being our friend now. Like, there's like that was so like vivid and exciting. All of that, the like, action painting, street work. And so if we only remember, there's for a long time been a tradition of theater getting outside of the proscenium, and a lot of US theater has gotten more and more contained and more and more formulaic. And if this moment has served to jolt us out of it, either via high tech or via just getting out onto the street, and like, making a ruckus, that'll be a really good outcome.
Yeah, I think for me, it's the additional paintbrushes or the additional tools in the tool belt. And so now that we've learned these additional skills, it's okay, how do we apply these appropriately to the next project so that we're not always just throwing everything at it. It's like when the with the advent of LED lights for everything. So now you can choose any color at any time, but sometimes that leads in the moment to the paralysis of all the decisions that now have to be made now instead of when you were doing the light plot when they should have been made. And so I think there's that interesting thing of like, now that we've got all of this, each project has its individual things, and these promenade things I'm excited about too. We're looking to take a couple shows as touring shows over the summer. We're hoping to do a new play that we've been developing about Genghis Khan. That's a solo show, and actually performing it around a campfire, which I think would be great. And our next show is building on the tradition of Janet Cardiff's audio walks. We're going to do a narrative walk that's geolocated around Cincinnati, so there will be different places that trigger different aspects of it, and you can choose different paths. And so we're really excited to get out of the theater. Not that we rarely have traditional proscenium artists in our theater. We tend to be much more in your face than that. But it feels we have a tradition of wanting to get out of the building, and it feels good to be able to embrace that this summer, particularly because cicadas are coming out this summer. So it's Brood X. So our walking tour show is going to be about Persephone and Inanna and cicadas and the various emergence from the underworld.
Brood X is a great title.
It is a great title.
For something.
Yeah.
I've always looked at site work as being very scenographic, that you can show things in a site specific piece where the audience can see blocks behind the actor or a long hallway or what's around the corner. I mean, you can really show the audience's POVs that they would never get in a proscenium stage. And in a sense, this virtual performance thing does the same thing, because as a director or a creator, you are choosing the audience's point of view. You're picking their eye line. You're showing them what to see. And so I think for me, the step from one to the other was very logical.
Yeah, and there's no reason, even when you leave the traditional promenade that you can't, or the traditional proscenium that you can't still have a proscenium, as some theaters in Chicago have taken storefront theater to the next level and literally performed in the windows of storefronts in Chicago. We'll go to Lou Barron next.
Hi. So I am super curious, like now that we're kind of between like completely virtual or completely distance theater and are kind of like at the moment of like in betweenness with like what is theater going to be in the next year, like how you all are going about selecting your seasons, like when you're going through and thinking like what projects are we going to do. Are you now thinking like, well, this would be good as like a single camera, you know, film thing, or this would be like, how much more complicated has that process become and how are you doing it?
And we'll try to keep these answers short, everybody, so we can grab the last question as well. Go ahead.
For me, it's not the technology. It's like what play can possibly speak to this crazy moment in all of our emotional lives. Like that's the hardest thing, I would say, to keep it short.
We always pick our seasons sort of thematically, that feel like they fall into a particular thing. Our last season was the fight. This one was we can rebuild it. Our next season, I think, is going to somehow be about legacy, and like what do we build now and that survives after us, and I think that's going to be helpful. Our first show of the fall season is going to be the last show that we paid for the rights for before the pandemic hit. So we do have a very technological way of approaching that. But
I think for us, you know, we work project by project. So we really sort of develop the pieces. We're generative artists. So, you know, when a project is ready, we do it. And if it's not, we do a different project. I mean, I'm very excited about this idea. I did a piece at the Cherry Lane Theater a couple of years ago about Jane Jacobs, and I'm hoping to expand on that for Jane's Walk in a couple of months, where I'll have 6 different actresses all playing Jane Jacobs, all with their cell phones, all sighted in front of a building in Manhattan that is under threat of destruction, so that the audience can see and get in touch through sight what could be lost if they don't take action. So, you know, that piece feels like it now is a very important time as the construction industry is getting back into gear, that this piece, you know, is done. And, you know, then we have other pieces. We want to do a Diane DePrima piece that will be a traveling piece as well. So, you know, it just depends on what's ready and who's got the energy to drive it forward.
And to tie a couple questions together, what I love about that is not only are you choosing works that have to do with like the current time and what is applicable to your audience, but now you have this expanded toolbox to apply whatever tools you need to make this work happen. Let's go to Grace Bonner.
Hi. First, I just wanted to say thank you for the great discussion. This has been really interesting to listen to. My question is mostly for Ralph. You mentioned that Peculiar Works is a site-specific theater company. So I was wondering if you could just explain that a little bit more, and how that differs from like your traditional company. And then like a follow-up question is kind of like, because you're more site specific than working on a traditional stage, do you think that helped you during this transition with the pandemic?
Well, the last part first, I mean, yeah, I definitely think it helped. You know, when we started the company over 25 years ago, Manhattan and New York City wasn't quite doing so well. And there were a lot of vacant spaces, former industrial spaces. And we thought, oh man, we can get these spaces for cheap and we'll just do our show in there. We won't have to pay all this money to rent a theater. And then, you know, we incorporated the company and real estate in New York changed the next day, I'm sure. So finding cheap cheap places to perform has changed. But, living on a historic boulevard like the Bowery, living in a 200-year-old building that I do, I've always had a connection with the history of Manhattan and the history of New York City. So, I've gotten to know so many different historic buildings, or like Francis Tavern Museum. We did a play that was written in the 1706 at Francis Tavern Museum, which was being built right about that time. And to be able to go into some of these landmark spaces, or just to take an audience into like a dingy basement of a warehouse somewhere. We did a piece called After Party just before COVID hit in just up the block from me, where the painter Mark Rothko had his painting studio. It has literally been sitting vacant for decades. And to bring an audience into that space, those things just really jazz me. But also in 1999, you can Google this, we did a show called Privileged and Confidential, which was a play for a theater conference at the LA Theater Center. We had 4 actors out there, 5 actors in New York. We wanted to do it on the web, but there wasn't enough bandwidth at that time to do that. So we did it on video conferencing, and we had actors and cameras and big projection screens so everybody could see all of the actors. And, I still hold in my heart that that's the first time a play has ever been done as a virtual performance like this. But, when I think about the bumps and bruises of doing that, it didn't all go so well, but it went, and we did it. So I don't know, it's sort of, we've always worked with technology and projections. And so this work just seems sort of natural for us.
Awesome. Thanks, Ralph. And thank you, Grace. So I'm going to ask this kind of final wrap-up question, and we'll go around the horn with this and start with Ralph and kind of go in the reverse order that I introduced you. So I'd love to know, what is the biggest thing you're taking away from this past year of experimentation and new work? What do you hope we're talking about a year from now? If we gathered again a year from now, what do you hope we're still talking about and taking away from this time? Let's start with you, Ralph.
Well, I almost have 2 answers to that. The first is, what's important, it's the little things like, I have my laptop sitting on a music stand, and the music stand keeps sinking down. Is it, little things of thinking like that. Why didn't I tape the music stand so I don't have to keep lifting it up? Knowing to restart your computer before you do one of these things, knowing to turn off your modem and your router and boot it back up so that, all of your systems and signals are clear. There's a lot of it's these little things that make the magic. Now, I don't think we're going to be talking about that years from now, but I hope we're still fighting over, well, is live better or is virtual better? Because that means both are still happening. So I hope we're still arguing and fighting. We don't have a Cedar Bar or a Phoebe's to hang out in, but I hope we find some place to get together and still, wrestle with these issues.
Do you want to plug any upcoming work real quick before we move on to Andrew?
Well, I am going to be doing Behind the Curtain on May 20th as a benefit for the Episcopal Actors Guild. So if you've ever, this is about the birth of Broadway. If you know about Broadway, you love Broadway, but do you know how it all began? In 60 minutes, I can show you 100 images that will explain to you how that all happened. And I find it, very fascinating. Again, it's New York City history. And then Jane's Walk, the Municipal Art Society, we will be doing Jane's Calling with 6 Janes. And I believe that's going to be Friday, May the 7th.
Awesome. All right, Andrew, how about you? What are we taking away from this year?
I came up with an answer, then I discarded it immediately before you asked the question. It's like awesome. I emptied the recycle bin up here. One of the things that I hope we take away is the idea of accessibility. One of the things that has been true of the pandemic is people who could, either because of cost or location or some sort of other accessibility issue, could not have seen these shows. And the more we can democratize theater and the more we can expand who gets to see it and who gets to participate in the creation of it, the better it is for our art form and for society. And I hope that we can, as we come back a year from now, we're talking about how much more equitable theater has become as an industry and for audiences. That's my dream.
And then what's next for No? What can people expect from No coming up?
Well, we will be offering our audio walking tour Crypsis online, and I believe we're going to be able to offer also a video walkthrough version that will allow you to choose which path you take through the course of the video. So that's exciting. I'm sorry, I have a landline. Why? I don't know. It's ringing now. So that's coming up. And also 2 weeks from now, we're announcing the lineup, the Cincinnati Fringe Festival. So you can check that out at cincyfringe.com. Much of it will be live online. We'll also be doing some live outdoor performances that we will also be live streaming. So it's very exciting.
Awesome. Awesome. And let's go to you, Sam. What are we taking away?
Oh boy. I mean, I think I think, you know, I feel like it's a two-part answer for me too. There's the losses in the gains that I think we're taking away, that this is not a good replacement. You know, like, it's as exciting as all of this has been, and a lot of it has been quite exciting for me creatively and for our company, you know, and creatively. It has also been lonely and tough and all of those things too. After a day, one of the actors in the talk back, like an audience member, said, "Oh, what I'd like to hear from the audience what it was like," and the actor was like, "It sucked," which is like not feedback you usually get at the like happy like. But it's important to like connect to how much this isn't what it is, and then it's very exciting to think about what we have learned and what we can take forward, which, I mean, it basically goes to Andrew's talking about accessibility, about you know, geographic, but also like in all the different ableisms, and also to JR, your earlier question about just getting outside of, or it was an audience member's question of getting outside of the proscenium, or getting outside of the box if you don't have a proscenium. Like maybe, I mean, I think we're all sort of more or less experimental companies who had a predilection for this already, but maybe other companies will be emboldened to think outside of their standard forms, since we've had a fair amount of success doing, you know, getting outside of the standard forms, having been forced out by these circumstances. It would be great if there was that much more inventiveness floating around in general.
Definitely. And what's next for Cherry?
Cherry has, at the end of May coming up, we have our headphone walking play, our third headphone walking play called Trapdoor. This one is lead written by Lyrie Van Cleef Stefanen, who's an amazing poet, a National Book Award nominated finalist poet. She's at Cornell and is one of our longtime collaborators, and that's on some of the Black histories of Ithaca and the sort of untold stories. So we're super excited about that. This is not even announced yet, but we're sneaking open the space in June with a kind of 3 weeks of dance workshops where we are just going to explore how many people we can bring in and in what ways. And it'll be kind of like, really, there's not even a word we haven't even like titled this series yet, but it's going to be Dance in June at the Cherry Arts. So anyone who's watching this, you heard it here first. You'll see it announced when we figure out exactly what it is. And we actually don't plan to figure out exactly what it is until it's happening. It's going to be like that. And then at the end of the summer, super excitingly, we're collaborating with the Hangar Theater on an Odyssey, which is a retelling of Homer's Odyssey. And we're doing a kind of version of the Public Theater's Public Works program, where we're collaborating with a variety of community organizations that we're reaching out to now to sort of inform a retelling of this story of people making it back to where they came from. So that's what's coming up next. And the season after that remains to be seen.
Well, that's awesome. And if I may be so presumptuous to offer my own takeaways from this year, yeah, it's been, I think the one large thing that, as we're focusing on the work specifically that you all are doing and that we haven't really touched on is theater has gone through this massive racial justice and anti-racism movement over the past year. You may have seen the hashtag We See You White American Theater, or WYSIWAT, as we say for short, which was a collective that came together and issued 40 pages of demands to the theater community to offer better circumstances for the marginalized communities. So that is one thing that is probably my biggest takeaway, because it's probably the thing I've written about the most over the last year. And hopefully, I mean, the hope is that we don't have to have that conversation a year from now. The hope is that we can make those changes and make that progress to see more equality and see better circumstances and more inclusive circumstances at all theaters. And, that goes for the work being chosen, the people in charge, the people chosen to work on these plays, and all of that. And so I hope that theater is taking that to heart. One of the big questions I've been asking people a lot now in my reporting is are you actually seeing change? Those demands came out last summer, I think late June last summer. And so it's been 8 months since those demands came out. And so one of the things I keep asking people is, have you seen change? And unfortunately, the answer right now is no. In a lot of places, a lot of the answer is no. And so I hope that we do start to see change, especially as people get back into theaters and we start to see what these spaces are after having a year where you're not technically in the space. We can see if we actually have created a more inclusive and better environment for everybody. So that's my biggest takeaway. But yeah, at this point, I'd just love to invite everybody to turn their cameras on and sound on, to give our wonderful panelists a round of applause and thank them for their time. Thanks, everybody.
Bravo.
And then everybody is welcome to hang out afterwards to join us for join us at the stage door, join us in the lobby and chat a little more afterwards. We'll be around. Thank you all so much
Is that
for your
sharing?
time.